many reasons. And when you navigate through the city, you see small indications of growth and, more importantly, job creation. And I'm not talking about the larger employers, I'm talking about the mom and pops, the merchant class. I think the artwork goes a long way towards fostering that. We're in a desert here. Maybe it's perceived, but from what I see compared to other parts of the city, there's a complete absence. We fall off the map, once you go past a certain part of the city. What's in the pipeline, and essentially what's out there that makes me wrong on this?
Yeah, so everybody heard the question? Okay, so this is something that people speak about and feel, frankly, consistently. They say that, there's areas of the city that have been neglected, and I feel like my resources or my neighborhood isn't getting the adequate city resources as elsewhere. And the interesting thing is that when we go into almost every other neighborhood, it's kind of a consistent message, to be honest with you, which speaks to the fact that things may be somewhat equal throughout the city. Now, take a step back and think about kind of what we are focused on, because I wouldn't argue the point that the south side of Jersey City has been neglected for a long, long time. And there's a lot of reasons why that is. I would say at the core of it was really kind of an affordable housing program and a market rate housing program that incentivized only affordable lower income housing being developed on the south side of the city for a long time. I'll explain that a little bit further, and then I'll tell you how we've started to correct that. So the process prior to 2 years ago was that when a developer comes into Jersey City to build on the waterfront, and they would apply for a tax abatement or a pilot, depending on how you want to refer to it, they would pay into something called the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. That trust fund would fluctuate between $5 and $6 million, and its goal is to supplement affordable housing being built elsewhere in the city. And another developer would come and then make an application to the people responsible for that in the city, and then they'd be allocated the dollars. And it was kind of a rolling application process, so you were never comparing one application against another. It was whoever came in, they would hopefully look at it on its merits and say, yeah, that kind of seems like a good project. So what ultimately was happening over time was that all of the market rate housing was being built closer to the waterfront, downtown, closest obviously to the views, right? And then the developers that were getting that dollars from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund were going to buy land in the cheaper areas from their economic standpoint to supplement that. So they were building into the areas on the south side of the city. And that really created that narrative of the tale of two cities, where you have one with market rate and one with more affordable housing, so to speak, and one area that feels neglected. So what did we change on that to begin with? So we changed, first of all, the process to apply, okay? So it's no longer rolling. The first thing we did is that there is a board in place now that governs over this, and there's application periods. So you could actually see where and what one is compared to another as far as the rank, which is important. And then we created incentive programs on how we rank those programs. So if you look at the way the abatement program is working now, or the affordable housing program, they work in concert, basically. What do I mean by that? They incentivize development that is market rate away from the waterfront. So the abatement program tiers up. The incentives become more aggressive as you get away from the waterfront. And for the affordable housing, it is the exact opposite. It becomes more aggressive as you get closer to the waterfront. The reason for that is to create more mixed neighborhoods, okay? And it's slowly working. For the first time, you do see development in Journal Square. You see plans. They just approved 1,600 units on the west side of Jersey City. They worked with a neighborhood group here in the South Greenville redevelopment plan. So things are moving, although it doesn't happen overnight, essentially. So that's on the development front. With regards to the policing and resources, it bothers me when people say, well, all of those resources are going, let's say specifically on the policing front, to downtown and we're neglected here. It's really not true. In the last 2 years, we've hired more than 150 police officers, and a disproportionate number of them, the vast majority of them, are placed in the south side and the west side of Jersey City, because we recognize that this is the area that has the biggest crime issue. Now that said, we still have a lot more to go, and we still want to increase the numbers of the police department, but that is a challenge ultimately. So finally, from a budget standpoint and open space and parks, if you look at our budget and you look at where we are spending money on parks and open space, it is disproportionately on the south side of the city. So if you don't believe what I'm saying from a policy standpoint, just look at the budget that these people vote on and you would see where our priorities are ultimately. And you would see that we are moving in a direction that I think is favorable to kind of balance things a little bit more, although frankly we've got a lot more work to do and it's not going to happen overnight.
Specific to art, though.
Specifics to what?
To art.
To art, specifics to art. You know, the mural program is a big step in that direction ultimately. As it relates to a museum or a cultural institution?
No, just as far as the artwork, on West Side Avenue, it's been stalled for 8 months now.
So what component, like the mural program?
There was a mural that was started and it hasn't been completed, it's just the sketch work.
Okay.
No one seems to know.
Okay.
You know,
I don't know the specific.
It just doesn't seem that the art, it just seems that the art is concentrated, and with that concentration, it creates its own ecosystem.
Sure.
And it's new businesses, businesses that are existing, that are cleaning up their windows, making improvements, all incremental stuff.
Yeah, sure.
And this is the stuff that, you know, is natural.
Yeah.
This doesn't take tax dollars.
Yeah.
You know, it's for the merchants to sort of,
Sure.
you know, improving their business. It just seems that no one has, it seems there's a very real disconnect on the art.
Okay,
And
so that's fair. In the spring to the fall, this coming year in 2016, I believe there's 25 to 30 scheduled murals that are going up in the city. I will get, after every one of these meetings, I've had some actionable steps. And
could the councilman speak to specifics?
I don't know if you would know the exact locations of those. I will get them to you in the next day or so, the exact locations of where those are going. I'll email them to you, no problem. I'll take your email before we go and you'll get it from me. You know, I'll get you the exact maps and the locations and who they're slating as the artists. Pretty simple.
To be fair, this just reinforces the concern, though, that it's not at the finger. You know, it's not at the finger. This is what's going on. This is coming down the road. This is the artist. You know, and it relates to the business. The business grows from it. You know firsthand. Here's the big step.
I would just tell you, it's a city of close to 300,000 people. I would never know the exact locations of artists and who they are. So, I mean, for me, we tried to hire somebody who's good in that program, and they've ultimately, I think, done a pretty good job. And I could get you the answers, and we administer it, we fund it, we try to make sure it's successful. I think the feedback's been pretty good. I wouldn't know exactly which corner the mural starts and where it's going. So, but I'll get it for you tomorrow. I've got no problem with that.
Excuse me?
Yes, we'll go you, and then we'll go you. Okay? Yes.
So my question is regarding the Port Authority's Cross Harbor Freight Program. As you know, if this program is allowed to go through and complete, this neighborhood is looking at 24/7 train traffic. These trains run off of diesel fumes, so not only are we going to be dealing with carcinogenic diesel, but we also have the noise and the further air pollution. Now, the City Council passed a resolution condemning this program, so I'm wondering what the next steps are, what the city's planning on doing about that.
All I can tell you is that from speaking with the port, that they're gathering the information, you know, the two alternatives that were selected, and they said they're going to look at everything, and the next step, they're going to look at the environmental impact, which we both know is huge, and that's why we're opposing it, everybody in the council opposed it. So there's a time lag right now. So sometime, I believe, in by summertime, they're going to come out with yet another paper saying, this is where we're at, this is where we're at, and this is what we suggest.
Okay.
But we're listening.
But by ramping up operations down at the port, they're violating their own environmental impact process. Just so you know. Okay.
I got you. We talked about this.
I know.
Yeah. We're on.
What do you mean by ramping up that they're
They're increasing
more update time, but go ahead.
Right, but they're increasing operations down at the rail yard, at Greenville yards, and they're doing that before they've completed their environmental impact statement process. So I mean, they might try to say that it's not related to that program, but considering they're launching the rail cars from the rail yards. Yeah. Yeah.
The Port Authority
Okay.
will work with Frank.
Okay.
That's fine. Yes, ma'am.
Talk about the proposed casino that's going
Yeah.
to be put up and what you can see as the impact on this area.
Yeah. So you all heard the question, just making sure everyone's on the same page. The proposed casino. Let me start at the beginning so people kind of know where we are in the process now, and then I'll fill in my position ultimately, and then how I think this is going to play out after November. So I've been on the record for saying that I think a casino is generally a good thing based on the facts that I have. I recognize that there's pros and there's cons to it for certain. But when you weigh, from my standpoint, all the pros and the cons, my belief is that the pros outweigh the cons. And I'll explain that in great detail in a second. The beauty of the situation, though, is that ultimately I won't make the decision on this. The state legislature approved at the end of last month, and they will vote again for a ballot initiative this November. That basically means that when you go to the polls and vote in November, at the bottom of that ballot, there will be a question that will basically ask you if you want casinos in northern New Jersey. It will not be specific to Jersey City, but it will ask you whether you want casinos in northern New Jersey. You ultimately have an opportunity to vote on that, and that vote will matter whether it expands or doesn't expand. Now, my position has always been that if it passes statewide, meaning the greater number of voters in New Jersey say that casinos are a good thing, meaning that casinos will happen in North Jersey, but the voters specifically in Jersey City oppose it, I will oppose it as well. Ultimately, we will work for you on this, and if the people in Jersey City vote and they say they do not want this, then by all means, we will not push it on you. That I assure you, there's plenty of people, Yvonne comes to everything I go to videotape it, so I assure you that I'm comfortable in saying that your vote will matter and we will take action based on what you decide. The only thing I would tell you is to make sure that you understand the entire issue, because the proposal today does not have building a casino in a residential neighborhood. The closest area to it is Port Liberté. It is actually directly adjacent to Liberty National. Next to Liberty National Golf Course, there is an area that is zoned right now for 2 30-story towers. Instead of those 2 30-story towers, they are proposing to have one world-class casino. Now, why do I think that that is a benefit? I recognize that casinos have pros and cons. So first of all, it's not directly in proximity to any residential neighborhood. Okay, so that's first. Number two is the minimum investment that is required by the state for this is $1 billion. $1 billion into Jersey City. That is really significant dollars. Okay? That is a venue that would have non-gaming, so the non-gaming stuff, the restaurants, the nightlife, that sort of component, the revenue on that, and the hotel and the convention center equal or greater than the casino component. So we're looking at a world-class $1 billion destination facility that they say the projections are that it would be the highest used casino in North America because of the proximity to New York. Okay? So Jersey City in the legislation today stands to benefit financially. We would have a percentage of the dollars that come from that, which would obviously impact you from a budget standpoint and your taxes in a significant way. That's number one. And number two is the projections are 5,000 plus jobs. Okay? Now they're not the best jobs, but it's 5,000 plus jobs in an area and a time where people need them. So you recognize the pros and the cons of this ultimately, and when I look at what people say are the downside of casinos, and then I look at those positives from my standpoint, I tell people when I get into that booth in November, I'm going to vote yes. That's my vote. But my vote doesn't count for any more than anybody in this room. So if you all vote no, and that's the majority of the people in Jersey City, I'm not going to move it forward, and I doubt that the council, I mean, they could do their own thing, but I doubt that they're going to want to do it either because you all spoke on it. And I think that we're pretty comfortable with that. Okay?
You both talked about the pros. You alluded that there are cons.
Yeah.
How about the traffic patterns? How about access to Liberty State Park?
So it's not, so the cons, people could argue, right? People can argue, they could argue the proximity to Liberty State Park. There's already going to be heavy construction on that side of Liberty National, right? So that's one component of it. That's the pros and the cons. There's obviously 14A and Turnpike access over there. There's ferry service back. So there's pros and cons on both sides, right? And everybody, all I'm going to say is that when you get in there, not to have a knee-jerk reaction saying, okay, a casino is going to be built in my specific neighborhood. There's going to be a lot of information that's out there over the next 8 months, and make sure you read it, because it's a complicated issue that ultimately will have an impact one way or the other on Jersey City. You are talking about significant revenue opportunities for Jersey City, for your budget. I say all the time at these community meetings, I say that, look, our cost, meaning the cost for government, even if we do nothing during the course of a year, our cost of government escalates every single year. The reason for that is the same reason that your household costs escalate every year. Every time you go to the supermarket, every year over the next year, it increases. There are only two ways to pay for that. That's it. It's not rocket science. There's only two ways, right? The number one is that I raise taxes on people. That's one way to pay for it. When cost increases, that's healthcare, that's union increases, that's cost of services, cost of renovation of parks. It increases every single year, right? So either raise taxes on the people in here, or I find new people to pay for it. Thus, we try to be a growing city so that you don't have to pay for it. Or the third way, actually, is that there's three ways, is to find alternative ways to pay for it. Different people, different fees, different opportunities. This is one of those, okay? So those are things that I ask you to please weigh out when you get there. And I'm not saying that I'm right entirely on this or I'm wrong. It's information. You go in there and you make a decision in November. We'll vote for you, and then you, and then you, and we'll come back to it.